Welcome everybody to the Treasured Podcast. It's your boy Ching. Appreciate everybody. Today's podcast is going to be a pretty serious one, but encouraging. Don't forget though, we do have a Patreon. Go and support us on Patreon, guys. Just for $5 a month gives you exclusive access of all of our podcast footage and audios, raw and uncut for you guys, as well as exclusive Discord role and Discord section for you guys. And depending on your level of support, you guys do get some merch. If you get up into those tiers, your support helps us get this into the hands of people who need it the most. I appreciate y'all. So we're just gonna dive straight into it, guys. Today's I don't know, it's gonna be serious and a little bit hefty. And why? It's because we're talking about a serious situation that's happening right now on the other side of the world in the Middle East regarding Israel. And if you guys don't know what's going on, I highly recommend that you go and educate yourself on what's happening. It's always good to know, but it's very sad what happened there. So last weekend, we're approaching, I think, a week now since it's happened. Israel was attacked by a terrorist organization called Hamas, and hundreds of people lost their lives, unfortunately, in the most gruesome, barbaric way imaginable. Everybody was targeted. It wasn't just like men that were killed. It was men, women, children, babies, even dismembered at when they went to all the settlements that Hamas took over and started going through and clearing them out, but also counting the dead. It's just very sad, heartbreaking to hear the carnage that went on while they were there. Right now, Israel's in a state of war. They are currently bombing Gaza, where it's a Hamas-run state. There's a lot of controversies around that as well. There's a lot of talks around that from Palestine and Israel. Whose land was it first? Is it just? Is it unjust? And the whole nine. We're going to be talking a little bit about that, more so on what this means for the end times, what this means in the eschatological events for us, and how we should be approaching it. But before we start, I just want to start by saying I don't condone the death of any of the innocents that are losing their lives right now. I think that we're getting real lost into politics real quick, and I'm coming at this more so from a biblical perspective. This is not political. I'm not here for a political statement. I'm here to simply encourage you guys at the end of the day and what the Lord speaks about these times. And this is times when we think about these things, guys, like this is something that's been foretold since the beginning. It's crazy that we see these type of events happen, and then we're like, whoa, how could this have happened, or however, and then start thinking about all these, like, where did this all come from, all this other stuff, right? The Bible's been talking about this for a long time. It speaks about times such as these. It's very specific. The Bible, like we all know, is a story, and it speaks about everything. And near the end, we're talking about the times of revelation, the times of the coming, the times of great persecution, the great falling away. We're talking about the turmoil that's going to be on this earth. And like Jesus spoke a lot about this in Matthew 24, but really just in telling us, be prepared, be ready to endure. How do we respond to this time, this day and age, where we're seeing things play out before our very eyes? So we'll be referencing a couple of sources that we have found, but one of the things I did want to start off with this Bible passage and going into this conversation about the really how do we handle what's going on in Israel? What's our response as a believer? How should we respond if you're not a believer? Really thinking about these things more intentional. And one, I can't think of a better way than having the words of Christ himself tell us how and what and when's and like how to prepare and what to look for. And we will be looking at things from like Frontier Alliance International. I think it's a great source for anybody that is watching that wants to learn more about what's going on in Israel, as well as they have some amazing Bible studies around Matthew 24 and 25. They have amazing Bible studies on the book of Daniel, Book of Revelation, other things, but I do appreciate their content when it comes to being very informative. It's not in a fear mongering way. I know people don't like talking about the end times. Eschatology really scares people away because then you get placed as a Christian, you get placed in like two camps. Either you're like super over the edge and you're wearing a tinfoil hat and all this other crazy stuff that comes with that, or you're super on the other side of things where you completely ignore it in your ignoring of the coming of the age, like the end times itself, the eschatological events that are happening, you're causing a lot of destruction in that way. So there's always these two like paradigms that you get put into, I think, or these thought processes that you get put into when you're talking about these things. I believe that Frontier Alliance International and the courses and the studies that they provide are as close to the middle, I think, as you can get. I don't see much one way or the other. I like I've done a study there, the Matthew 24 and 25 study back in 2020, and now I think it's a great informative way, and they have other Bible studies that are very very informational, and highly recommend it. So from that though, we're gonna start by reading Matthew 24. So let's go and read this for y'all. So when it comes to the end times, this is one of the most descriptive scriptures and passages because it's coming from Jesus himself. So just a little kind of backstory. This is a passage here in one of the Gospels where the disciples come. Like the disciples know Jesus through all of his journey being here on earth as fully man and fully God. Has referenced his going away, but also not like it's not a permanent goodbye. It's like I'm going away, but there will be a coming back. And it's taken the disciples a little bit, but some of them started to catch on. Now in this passage, it's when all that culminates, when they finally understand that there's gonna be a going away of Christ, but there's gonna be a coming back of. So Jesus has been telling his disciples and everybody as he's been walking this earth that he's gonna be going away, but also alluding that he will be coming back. And so there's a lot of things going around, and when we're taking this to the context as well at the times, like you got to think about at this point in time, all the Jews in Israel, that's what they're praying for. They're praying for the coming of the Messiah. So in this time of Israel, they're praying back for the Messiah to come. Messiah's here. A lot of Jews are ignorant on that. They don't believe the Messiah has shown up. Obviously, I mean, there's still controversy today. They don't believe that Jesus is actually the Messiah. A lot of people call him a prophet. However, in those type of religions, we know that he is the Messiah. He is the one that has come. So let's read this passage in Matthew. Jesus left the temple. So Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple. So Jesus left the temple and was going away. When his disciples came out to point out to him the buildings of the temple, but he answered them, "You see all these? Do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." This passage. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, telling us, when we see these things be, or when will we see these things be? And what will be the signs of your coming? The end of the age. And Jesus answered. So in this time, this is a specific thing. The disciples are asking, when are the signs of the age? And now this is really big. So they know that Jesus is going to be leaving and coming back. And so they're asking, in this here specifically, what is the signs of the age? When is this all happening? You're talking about something, this is pretty big. When it talks about destruction of the temple, when you say that to a Jew, that's a pretty hefty thing. Because also that means the Messiah has come, and a lot of things come and entailing that. Because a lot of people back in the day, why they also don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, because they believe that the Messiah was going to come with an army as a military leader, a lot of things of that nature. So that was a huge thing when you are talking about the implications of the destruction of the temple. Then the disciples ask, when are the signs of the age? Which is quite frankly a lot of things that get asked nowadays, like when is the end of the world? When is it all going to culminate and stuff? So this is really huge. I think this here for in itself, when we ask, what are the signs of the ages and what's going on right now in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza and the whole thing, I think if anybody comes and tells you that this is the date that the world's going to end, or however, false. Now it's in the Maranatha Global Bible Study that FAI Studio has, Frontier Aliens International. They speak about specifically and they teach about specifically this idea that there's going to be one generation that does know the coming of, and after reading a few of the scriptures and reading, like, going back Daniel, reading Ezekiel, reading Matthew 24 and 25, I can see that because they're talking about a generation where it clearly marked the time where you know exactly when Christ is going to come. In Matthew, I believe Matthew 12 gives you a date, a number of days that when what specific event has to happen, and once that specific event has to happen, in that in itself will then kick off the countdown for to say when you can say, hey, this is the end of days. I never really noticed that. I haven't really read or studied the Bible that in depth. But when I was studying this topic and really getting into the nitty gritty of understanding the end of the age, book of Revelations, the whole nine, a lot of people in the Christian community do get flack because they don't talk about this stuff enough. And we'll have our 2 cents about that here after we finish reading Matthew 24. There will be a clear date when you know this is the end. There'll be a clear time and date of when all these things are to happen. But this is called, what Jesus is talking about and what the disciples are asking, like, when will we know these things? Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. In order for a destruction of the temple to happen, there has to be a temple built for it to happen. A lot of people think there was a destruction of the temple back, I forget what number AD that happened by the Romans, but that obviously was not, well, it's the temple, but not the time that the temple needed to be destructed that Jesus is talking about here in this passage. And there's clear implications on that. Reason why we're going through this again, guys, is because what I'm proposing to you guys is that the events that are happening right now in Israel, the events that are happening right now in Israel, Gaza, and around the whole Middle East, the tensions that are starting to brew around all the surrounding countries around Israel, the talks about Jerusalem, the talks about like when you look at the Hamas leaders and what they're saying about how their goal is to eradicate Israel of Jewish presence. But on top of that, Jerusalem. And now we're going to watch some videos here soon of Pastor Greg Laurie talk about how Jerusalem is and it references this in Ezekiel, I believe it's, I think it's 37 and 38. The events that are to unfold in the end times are going to be like none other. It'll eclipse anything that we've ever seen portrayed on this earth, period. It speaks about that as well in the Bible, that nothing could compare to what will happen in the end. But the thing is, what we don't do a good job of is preparing ourselves on how we should be having a posture in our heart for the coming of the age. So let's read this here again. I'm going to just start from the beginning of the sign of the ages. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will we see these things be? And what will be the signs of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars." Now this, I want to stop there. This has been going on for a minute, right? So we have wars going on right now. War in the Ukraine. Now Israel declaring it's in a state of war. Rumors of wars when you have other nations wanting to subdue other nations. This idea of World War III going to start here soon, or it's coming, or maybe never going to show up. The idea when a lot of my posture when things are happening, it's not insensitive that I feel this way or that I react sometimes to this thing. A lot of Christians right now, when something happens when something evil happens, I think we will have to respond to it correctly. And I believe that, giving a thing of giving empathy, giving the right mourning right now, I feel like I have empathy for the Israeli people and the innocent Gazan people, the Palestinian people that are losing their lives right now in Israel. My heart is grieved for those people. My heart is grieved for Israel. My heart was grieved for, and it still is, for what happened in Israel, what took place just several days ago. If you're a believer in Christ, Israel is your second not even your second, it's your first home. Correct me. It's not your second home. Bible talks about us being grafted to a family tree, being grafted, being allowed to be a part of God's people. Where's God's people? Who is God's people? God's people is the people of Israel. So we've been grafted onto this family tree. So I take it as serious as like, wow, my family, my home has been attacked. People of my family have been brutally, barbarically murdered, and my heart just grieves and my heart is in mourning for them. And so when we see these things, some of these things shouldn't surprise us. How I say, when people of the world act like the world, why are we as Christians like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're acting that way? Bro, they're supposed to be that way. They don't have a root in Jesus. What do you guys, what do we? Rumors of wars. When we hear of wars and rumors of wars, right now we're hearing wars. We had and we're still rumors of wars. Jesus said, when you hear that, see that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Do not be alarmed, for the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And now we've seen these things start for a long time. But literally, people have been documenting that in these last 3 years, have we seen the most amount of natural disasters in places that never should be experiencing them. They're happening. We've heard cases about famines and the whole nine. This is happening today. And Jesus says, all these are but the beginning of birth pains. Then he says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because of lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. And now this is where I do feel we're in very much knees deep into this. Still, I think that what's going on right now, what's happening in Israel, they're just birth pains. Beloved, they're just birth pains. I think it's just a warning. I think it's just, hey, we're getting closer and closer. Jesus, the idea of Jesus coming soon has been going on for a while. I believe that we're closer to the end that we have ever been before. I'm not sitting here saying the end will be tomorrow. I'm not saying here the end will be in the next couple of years. I'm not sitting here the end will be in the next 100 years. I do not know. There's a specific thing that will be going into this passage that hasn't happened, that I can't sit there and say, hey, this is the end. But this has been a big thing. There's been a ton of false prophets. And it isn't just like, hey, we'll go into a podcast here. They only have it on Spotify for PC, apparently, if I had my phone connected, but I'm using my phone as an extra camera right now. So we can't really use that as video. So we're going to be doing an audio listening to the Maranatha Global Bible Study that we've been listening to and inserting from Dalton Thomas, talking about the take of these false prophets. But it's not going to be just these guys. Like, false prophets aren't just people that are coming and sitting here saying and preaching a different gospel. False prophets are some of the same people in the Christian faith that are saying this. And that's not like people like, oh yeah, you're right, man. That's like the Mormons, that's like this, that's like that. That's like, no. I'll let him explain that stuff. Right now, there's a great falling away, though. When we're talking about it's called the apostasia, which is called the great falling, basically just the great falling away. I think we're just in the beginnings of that. We've seen the highest increase of people deconstructing their faith, and they're deconstructing this, and they're falling away that, and they're just getting these revelations. Like Ruslan did a video of this guy saying that we're all just we're all worried about the same water bottle, or the water in the water bottle. This whole thing, like, is really weird. The way that he was saying is as if all religions, this universalist mindset of thinking, like it's the same God. There's just multiple roads to get to God. No. That's not what the Bible preaches. It's literally against everything. And then most even other beliefs don't preach that either. They don't go, hey, you can be a part of us and also part of everything else. It's be free. We've seen the increase of lawlessness, and even just this weekend, I think, or last weekend, I should say, has been probably one of the peaks in a long time. We haven't seen acts like these since World War II, the barbaric slaughtering of innocent life. We have not seen anything what took place last weekend in Israel in a very long time. The increase of lawlessness. And again, right now, like when we're talking, I'm sitting here boiling it down in my head and seeing things happen. Even just let's take it to the social dilemma that we have. Like the love of many is growing cold. Right now, love is being attacked of many. They're telling people are encouraging you to just be single and just do you and do whatever and don't worry about anybody else. Don't care about being loved. If you love, you're gonna be hurt. Marriage is stupid. All this other stuff. This has been on the rise for a while, but it's simply just birth pains, beloved. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Put a pin on that. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations. So endurance. I don't think we do a good job of preaching a lot about endurance here, but I feel like many people are just right now saying, look up, which is true. The Bible does talk about this. Jesus does say this is when the time of the age is coming, look up, which I do encourage you, beloved, look up, but also endure. Until these times happen, endure to the end. There's a great thing with endurance. Verse 15. But we'll start off with the heading, the abomination of desolation. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down and take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back and take his cloak. And alas, for the women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight might not be in winter or on the Sabbath. There's some serious implications here. So this is where Jesus is talking about the prophet Daniel. And if we want to know what the prophet Daniel is talking about, the abomination of desolation, essentially what the abomination of desolation is that the temple, the holy place, what we're talking about, this destruction of the temple. But before the destruction of the temple has to be built. The destruction of the temple will happen after the abomination of desolation is set. What that is that the Antichrist that is portrayed, is spoken about a lot, will come to the holy place, basically saying, I am God. And that is the end. And exalting himself in the holy place, in the temple. And that will be the kickstarter, the kick to what is now the end of the end of the days right here. When the abomination of desolation is set, here in Daniel 11, it speaks about this. And from that time, the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination of desolation makes it is set up. So what does that mean? When the abomination of desolation comes into the temple of the Jews and removes the ability, because the idea is the Jews right now, the Jews that literally still are, well, they're they're God's people, even if they don't believe in Jesus, they're still God's people. The yearning of this temple to be built is because they haven't had the ability to sacrifice. They still follow a lot of old Jewish law. So when we look at the Torah or even the Old Testament, right, they're still living in this era of like making sure that we're bringing burnt sacrifices to him and burnt offerings, and they're bringing offerings onto the Lord. Without a temple, Jews have not been able to do this for a long time. I don't know the amount of years, but it's been years. I'm assuming it's in the thousands. And if I remember correctly from what I've been talking about, so building of the temple is going to be allowing Jews to, one, be able to sacrifice once again onto the Lord, the Most High, Yahweh, the King of Kings. When the abomination of desolation is set upon, and it says the burnt offering is taken away, that means, and specifically what it's talking about is that when the Antichrist comes in and sets himself and exalts himself above the Most High and says, I am God, worship me, he's taking away the ability for them to be able to worship God once again. That and said, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives to the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in the allotted in your allotted place at the end of days. So it's talking about here. From that day, there's a specific event that kicks off the end times. 1,290 days is once the abomination of desolation is set. This is what's called the start of the tribulation. That's where how long this tribulation is going to last. When the end of the tribulation and when the end of those 1,290 days, the end of 1,290 days, my gosh, hits, that's the coming of Christ. So there is a fine time, but only the generation, as Jesus is talking about, only the generation that comes to see these things specifically. When the abomination of desolation is set, that hasn't happened yet. So when people are talking about, hey, this is the end of the world, this is when it's going to be happening. However, right now it's simply birth pains. But I implore you, what we're going over right now, and I encourage you, beloved, take heart in what's happening here. We're going to read the abomination of desolation here that Jesus speaks about. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken about the prophet Daniel, which we just went over in Daniel 12, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down and take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back and take his cloak. Alas, the women who are pregnant in those days, who are nursing infant, or for the women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infant in those days, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. And that's very specific. Harsh conditions. Winters in Israel are super harsh, but in general, we've been there. Winters right now in North Dakota are really, really harsh here. -degree weather. You like genuinely without good warm gear, just a good environment, you could simply just die to the harsh conditions of what is here in the winter and in Israel as well, and what it's talking about. And just general, most winters everywhere horrible for people's living conditions. On top of that, the Sabbath. Now, what we saw, what took place this weekend, the Sabbath, things literally stop. Jews don't do much on the Sabbath. They try not to violate Jewish law. When did Hamas attack Israel? They were really smart by attacking them on the holy day of the Lord. And that's why Jesus is like, if the abomination of desolation happens, like, pray it doesn't happen on a Sabbath, on a day where people can actually, on a day that where people will actually fight because they don't want to violate. Now we're closing another Sabbath or we're getting closer to another Sabbath for Israel. We're on Friday. Tomorrow will be their Sabbath. So a lot of people are like, what's going to happen now? Is the Hamas regime going to take over again? Or are they going to launch an attack after being bombed for a while? There's a lot of things, or a lot of questions that are happening for tomorrow because, again, the Sabbath is for the Jews. For there will be a great tribulation, such has not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. Again, when the tribulation happens, when these things come to play, we will see nothing it'll eclipse anything that you guys can think. Anything. No matter what great suffering that's happened in the world, it'll eclipse everything. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. Jesus is talking seriously how severe, like the severity of those days would be. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise, performing great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If he says, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, the vultures will gather.